is that we need a wall of separation between church and state to protect the church from the state, so that the state does not tell the church how to be the church. And I think that's so important for us as people of faith. I don't want any government, mine or anyone else's, telling me what is acceptable as Christian doctrine and what is not. That's not the role of the state.
Welcome to the J29 podcast, hosting conversations for American pastors about politics and culture in their preaching, discipleship, and mentoring. Visit j29coalition.com for more information.
All right, Amy, Cherie, I am hearing this word pluralism a lot. And I know what plural is because I learned that in grammar school. But what is pluralism?
Well, one way we can think about pluralism is that it's a framework. We often talk about pluralism kind of in conversation with diversity, and they're different but related. So pluralism is a framework that allows different groups of people to coexist and coexist peacefully. It's a framework that says we can have different people with different beliefs that can all participate in a system together, but we allow them to have their different voices and give them equal consideration in the public square. At least that's one way to frame it.
I would just add to that. I mean, I think Amy's framework and definition is excellent. But often people there's a common misconception that pluralism is the same as relativism. And that's not the case at all. As Amy just had explained, pluralism is a framework that allows for diverse views and diverse people, to live together without the state necessarily sponsoring one of those views. It does not speak to whether all views are equally true, which is what relativism is. And in many ways, for an example of pluralism, one can look to the First Amendment, which basically states that there should be no law prohibiting the free expression of religion, but there also should be no law establishing a religion. And that's an example of a pluralistic framework. It does not at all imply that all roads lead to heaven, that there is no such thing as error, or any of those misconceptions. But it does allow a framework for groups with different views, and including opposing and exclusive truth claims, to be able to live together without, say, all political disagreements being escalated into a religious war.
And that's one thing too, we often, as Christians, when you hear pluralism, some people think, oh, well, we can't be a part of that because, like Cherie said, we have exclusive truth claims. We believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. This is the true religion, the only true religion. But pluralism would say we as Christians should have an opportunity to express our faith, to bring our faith to bear in how we do our politics. But my Muslim neighbor should also be able to, and my Jewish neighbor and my secular neighbor. All of us should be able to bring our differing views, often opposing views, and I should be allowed to participate and respected for the beliefs I hold. And my neighbor who differs from me should also be respected for her beliefs, and then another neighbor should be respected for his beliefs. So there's a way that we can all bring who we are and our perspectives and our diversity into the conversation. And ideally, in a strong pluralistic society, that diversity allows for lots of voices to be heard, lots of people to participate, and the conversation hopefully is broader and wider than it would be if we had only one narrow view.
Okay. So I'm hearing a lot of good things about pluralism in a community. What are some of the costs of living in a pluralistic society?
Well, I can certainly mention one of the tensions of living in a pluralistic society is that you won't have if you are of the majority viewpoint, it will not be a foregone conclusion that all of your beliefs will necessarily be enshrined into law. There will be a process of contestation, of public debate, of negotiation and navigation, and trying to make the case, trying to persuade others, as opposed to having, essentially an assumption that one's deepest values will be all enshrined in law, and that can be extremely frustrating, and it is one of the legitimate tensions of a pluralistic society. Um, as Christians, there are things that we believe to be true that are exclusive of other truth claims. There are aspects of human nature that have real world consequences that when there's policies that don't take that into account, we think that real injustice can result. And the process of kind of arriving at public policy is necessarily going to be a messier, more difficult, more contested process in a pluralistic society. So those will be one of the tensions in a country where, say, the state and the church are one. You're not going to have some of the same frustrations in terms of seeing some of your policy preferences enshrined into law if you are of the majority faith. But of course, there's other problems that are associated with that. So, don't want to give the sense that, gosh, pluralism is utopia. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. It is a very much an anti-utopian framework that acknowledges that we are we are diverse as well as flawed and fallen human beings who are prone to error, and somehow need to find a way to live together uh, despite our different views and our propensity to error.
Mhm.
And it also, I mean, there's also this issue that there's necessarily competition when we have pluralism, and sometimes competition and there's conflict. So pluralism is not, like Cherie said, it's not a sign that all is well and perfect and easy. But because there's competition, there are all these different views are allowed. And without that competition, we would have something where we have a theocracy, we have authoritarianism, we have rule by elite. And so many voices are completely shut out. So those who are happy with what is happening feel like they get everything they want, and those who are concerned get nothing. So in a pluralist society, what we have instead is a process of compromise and a process of working together, which is, I think, at the heart of a democratic republic like the United States. A group of diverse people working together to figure out what they think is the best way forward. And we know as Christians, as fallen people living in a fallen world, working with broken institutions, none of this is going to be perfect. So our goal isn't perfection. Our goal is to achieve the best outcomes we can, recognizing that they may not be right and they may need to be corrected. So pluralism, I think, allows for that correction, kind of gives a little bit of humility maybe built into the process, which I think overall is good. But if you want 100% everything you want to happen the way you want it to happen, pluralism isn't going to help you get there.
Hmm. Okay. So I was with a congregant the other day, and they've been on YouTube. And they found a grip of pastors who are saying things like, we need to work to make America Christian again, and have Christian laws, and have only Christians in leadership, and make sure that we have a Christian society. What that sounds nice, I guess. How does that interact with this idea of pluralism? Like, help me as a pastor as I'm talking to this congregant about perhaps some of the dangers of that idea?
So that may sound nice to you. That doesn't actually sound nice to me.
Okay.
Here's a couple of reasons why.
Okay.
One is we say we're going to have Christian laws based on Christian principles. What does that actually look like? I believe the Bible to be true. I believe it to be the Word of God. I believe it to be that which should guide all that I do. And it's full of wisdom and principles to help us as Christians live out our life. But it doesn't tell us how to create a polity. It doesn't tell us how to deal with public problems. So my answer to how we should deal with healthcare and your answer and your congregant's answer might all be different, and we might all be coming at it from a Christian perspective. So we're looking at the same Bible, the same principles, but we're coming up with different outcomes. So there's an assumption there that Christian public policy is exactly the same and can be agreed upon. So I think that's kind of there's a falsity to that assumption. The other thing I say, I think we just always, it's never fun, but I think Jesus commands that we basically need to apply the golden rule, right? So if we are to do unto others as we would have them do unto us, say, oh, wow, so we're going to have a Christian society with Christian laws and Christian principles. That sounds great. How would I feel if I said a Muslim society with Muslim laws and Muslim principles, a Hindu society with Hindu principles? Wait, I don't think that sounds as good. So if it feels different with a different religion imposed, then we actually are imposing something on others that we don't want to impose on ourselves. And then I think we have to ask, and I think that's part of the beauty of Christianity. Christianity is not a religion that imposes. Christianity is a religion of an invitation. God comes to us. Jesus became a man to pay a penalty for our sin. It's very, very different. We're not trying to get to God. God comes to us, and there's an invitation that we can accept or reject. But God never imposes Christianity on others. Jesus never imposes his act of salvation. We have to make that decision if we want to accept it.
I just add on to Amy's excellent answer that, in some ways, what the pastors that you saw are advocating for actually has been tried in American history. I mean, after the Puritans came, fleeing religious persecution, most of the states actually did have a state-sponsored church, and they were Christian. But what you found is that in the Northeast, different states, it was a congregational Christian state-sponsored church. In other places, it was Anglican. And so you had different versions of a Christian state being, imposed by the state. And you also had, as a result, people who were themselves Christians, but fell afoul of different denominational disputes. And as we know, we had different people fleeing religious persecution, and different states, like Rhode Island and Pennsylvania, being founded as essentially havens from that kind of political persecution. So this has been tried. It's not like this is a new thing. And what we see actually is that, being fallen people, human nature kicks in, and there's almost always, injustice as well as persecution that results from it. I would also just say that one of the real, I think, not just advantages, but perhaps even virtues of a pluralistic framework, like the First Amendment, is that it provides a protection for religion from the state, and that when state and church are combined, it becomes the province of the state to say what the dictates and the teachings of the church are. And that is a power that I think we as Christians should be very concerned about ceding to the state.
And sort of pulling on that history, it's been tried. It didn't go so well. And then when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution, they're like, we're not going to do that. So we tried to establish religion. And as Cherie said, I love the irony, fleeing religious persecution, which many of our earliest colonists were, and then immediately setting up a theocratic system that imposed religion. But so the founding fathers realized this is not really quite working the way we hoped, and we need to have religious pluralism. And they were doing something that was distinct. They were doing something new. The American experiment truly was an experiment. Thankfully, I'd say it's been a very successful experiment. We're 2.5 centuries in, and it's worked pretty well. But they realized there needs to be room for different religious beliefs, maybe different Christian beliefs or different other beliefs. And so Roger Williams, one of those who fled to Rhode Island because of his persecution, when we look back to that image of the wall of separation of church and state, it actually comes from, he's writing about, in the U.S. context, he's going to introduce it to our context. He's pulling it from folks in Britain. But the idea is that we need a wall of separation between church and state to protect the church from the state, so that the state does not tell the church how to be the church. And I think that's so important for us as people of faith. I don't want any government, mine or anyone else's, telling me what is acceptable as Christian doctrine and what is not. That's not the role of the state. And so the religious pluralism that we have in the United States is such a gift for us in the United States, allows us to practice our religion freely. It also allows people of other religions or no religion to have those beliefs and not be penalized by the state. And I think that's beautiful.
I'll also just add, Caleb, the founders gave a great deal of thought to this.
Hmm.
And they have left behind a lot of writings on the subject too. I mean, so it's not that we have to think through it all for the very first time. I mean, we have a lot of resources and a tradition of thought leadership on this. That George Washington has written about it in Federalist Papers. Several decades later, Alexis de Tocqueville really remarked upon the fact he thought part of the genius of America was the freedom of religion that it offered, which uh, not only allowed but encouraged religious faith to flourish. And so there's a lot of resources we can go to where very smart people who are also very faithful people have really wrestled with these issues over an extended period of time, and written it all down for us. So we're not kind of left on our own for the first time to puzzle out, gosh, what should be done.
It sounds like one of the benefits also is I don't have to worry about the government settling a theological dispute that I'm having with my Presbyterian buddy down the street. That they're not going to send government forces in to resolve the conflict we may be having about how to apply the Bible to things like baptism and communion. That seems like it's a benefit for pastors who are trying to shepherd congregations according to their convictions. But then there's also the church engaging in the body politic. So I'm hearing some goodness around pluralism as it relates to the health of the church. But I pastor a group of people, many of whom have a right to vote, and a lot of them exercise that right. And Amy, you I think are so wise in talking about how Christianity is invitational, not impositional. It's not trying to force people or coerce people to do something. And yet when I go back into the civic world, the public, so to speak, I am trying to get people to, line up with the way that I think. I have these certain convictions that are shaped by my community and hopefully by Scripture and by the Holy Spirit. And sometimes I think our government, our laws, our postures on things are not in alignment with that. How should we, or what's a wise way for us to engage in a pluralistic society, especially thinking about using our voice to speak to power, that's not drifting into coercion or imposition?
Well, I think the words you used, invitational and impositional, are actually really good ones. And so,
Amy, you used them.
oh, well, okay. Well,
Don't compliment me. I compliment you. You used them.
That idea of an invitation. I mean, so I think a conversation. So I have deeply held political beliefs. I know both of you do as well. And those are relevant to any conversation. But if I'm going to have a conversation with someone and sort of talk to them about, okay, so we've got this election coming up. Who are you planning to support? Let me tell you who I'm going to plan. Let's talk about this. And like we kind of come down to, I'm going to vote for this person, that person, or as I sometimes do, choose to skip that particular race and move to the next one. But we're going to vote for A, B, or nobody. And at the end of the day, we kind of have to make that decision. But to me, it needs to be a conversation, and it needs to be something that's done out of respect. So if we want to share our political views, and I'm all about doing that in the right place and in the right manner, it needs to be an opportunity to say, here's what I think, here's what I'm thinking. Maybe that's a better way of saying, here's what I'm thinking. Let me share what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? I want to hear what you're thinking, and let's discuss what we're thinking, so that it's not, here is the way and you better like it, because I'm not here to talk. I'm just here to tell. So let's be invitational. Let's be conversational. Let's be willing to truly engage. I think so many times when we talk about politics, we're really shouting about politics. We're not really wanting a conversation. We're wanting, I'm just going to tell you what it is, and you're just going to nod and you're going to do what I say because I am right. That's not a recipe, I think, for good Republican democracy. I don't think that's a recipe for a good conversation about politics. And so we need to open up that conversation so that we can listen to one another, share with one another, and recognize that at the end of the day, the goal should not be to win. We have so many battle metaphors in politics, which drive me crazy. This is not something we need to win. This is not a war. I'm just here to share. I'm here to listen. We're here to participate, not to feel like everything really comes down to win or loss.
You know, Caleb, embedded in your question is sort of a question about like whether and how Christians should be involved in politics. And, pluralism does not preclude at all Christian participation in politics. Quite the contrary. And in many ways, I would say it would be inappropriate for Christians not to be involved in politics, and that our faith does have views about what human nature is, about what justice is, what human flourishing is, and as citizens in a participatory democracy, I'd argue that we have a responsibility to participate. But there's a huge difference between participation or persuasion, even competition, and coercion. And what pluralism allows is for persuasion, for participation, even for competition, while not allowing for coercion. I think it's a huge difference. I keep going back to history, but almost all the big justice reform efforts that have happened in America have been, at least in part, very faith driven and faith motivated, whether it's civil rights or women's suffrage or child labor reforms. I mean, whatever it is, often there were Christians who were involved, often at the forefront of it, motivated by their faith. But if you look at the civil rights movement, there was very strategic and calculated civil disobedience, which was combined with a willingness to accept the full penalty of flouting the law. So there was a lawfulness that was combined, with the strategic civil disobedience, and it was grounded in the idea that essentially the systematic discrimination and bigotry ran counter to a biblical ethic of justice and human dignity, and that was articulated. Uh, but there again, there was an attempt to persuade those who disagreed with them and others who were listening. So I think there's a lot of models that we have in our own history showing ways in which Christians, motivated by their faith, have participated in politics, often to oppose and to change prevailing laws, but did so in a way that is not only thoroughly Christian, but was also quite pluralistic.
So, as we're thinking about, we've got midterm elections coming up. Shortly after that, it'll be another round of elections. We're thinking about federal, state, city, county, village elections and political issues that are really important. How would you coach pastors to cultivate healthy political engagement in their congregations in a pluralistic society like America today?
I think part of it, like, that's how do we cultivate healthy political engagement? How do we cultivate healthy engagement? How do we cultivate healthy living, healthy interaction? This can be in politics, but it can be in anything. And so that's where I think we just need to, we have so many biblical passages, so many biblical models out there that we like to tend to ignore. I often point to Galatians, where Paul talks about the acts of the flesh, that talks about things like discord and jealousy and factions and strife and anger. And those are things we're not supposed to do. And we see that all the time in politics. And then we have the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, gentleness, kindness, self-control. That's we have lists like that. Those are not exhaustive lists, but we're told who we are to be as followers of Christ. We're told how we are to present ourselves, and we are told these are the fruit of the Spirit. So I think we first need to say, let's look at the fruit. What are the fruit in my life? And am I modeling love, joy, peace, gentleness, patience, self-control? Or am I modeling, when I talk about politics, am I modeling anger and discord and jealousy and selfish ambition? Oh, oops, wait a minute. So I think we need to start with ourselves and do like a self-assessment. As I talk about politics, as I engage in these things, as I approach an election, what am I leading with? And I think if we're honest, many of us are going to say, oh, actually, I'm leading with that list of acts of the flesh. I'm leading the list of what we're not supposed to be as Christian, and I'm not leading with who I'm supposed to be as a Christian. I think we also can apply those. I think, again, first we need to start with ourselves. But then once we've done the self-assessment, then we can also say, we can apply that to those that we're looking at in public as who are contending for public office. How does this person comport him or herself? Are they full of anger, rage, selfish ambition, etc.? That's a sign to me that that's not the kind of engagement that we want to see. Is this instead someone who is exhibiting fruit of the Spirit? So I think it is helpful for ourselves, but also as we engage with others, carefully thinking about, what does this look like as a follower of Christ? Who am I called to be? What am I called to model? And what am I modeling? And then if that self-assessment goes poorly, which I think for most of us probably does, what practices do I need to change? How does my engagement need to change? How's the way I talk need to change? How's the way that I interact with others? How's the way that I communicate with others? What about that needs to change to align more with who I am supposed to be as a follower of Christ?
I'd also add, and this might even seem a little bit out there, but almost all of the spiritual disciplines are concerned first and foremost with to what we give our attention, our time, our resources, and therefore our love to. What is most important to us? Um, and part of the temptation, I think, of politics is pulling our attention into an arena that is essentially contested, competitive, oriented towards winning and vanquishing and dominating. And our faith does not call us to domination. It calls us to love, to know and love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves, which necessarily involves getting to know our neighbor. And sometimes I think just a reorientation of what are our first calls as children of God can be helpful. Uh, Political leaders want the church, want to co-opt people of faith. They want the energy and the authority of religion, for whatever cause it might be. And there are times, of course, there's very important issues, but I think church leaders should also be have a healthy skepticism of particular forms of involvement, and particularly the ways that we're involved. Another aspect of political combat is it wants to, just by its very nature, wants to elevate that particular issue above all others, to divide along those lines between, the proponents and the opponents, to stigmatize, even demonize the people on the other side. And so there are ways and means that attend political combat that at best are in tension with the ways of Christ and often are opposed to it. And so I think it's just one thing to keep in mind too, as elections near, um, and as parishioners get more involved.
So good. Well, Cherie and Amy, thank you. Oh, go ahead, please.
I sometimes hear people say, yeah, I know, but this is too important.
Yes.
As if I know I'm supposed to act this way, and I know this is who I'm called to be as a Christian, but in politics, all bets are off because it's just too important. And that's where I'm like, okay, feeling a little idolatry here, because there's a sense of what is most important. It's serving God. What are we called to? Love God and neighbor. And so when we start sort of saying if something is too important, I think again that should be like a gut check. What am I actually really talking about here, and what am I valuing? We get our values and priorities mixed up, and we prioritize what the world tells us to prioritize, and we don't prioritize what Jesus tells us to prioritize. So I think we just need to always be having kind of that check. What am I asking for? If I'm really worked up, if I'm really upset, why am I really upset? And perhaps as we start to answer those questions, we'll realize that we're just getting everything out of whack, and we're not loving and serving God first. We think other things are actually more important than God.
Well, Amy and Cherie, thank you so much for giving us your time, your wisdom, and your coaching. Where can people find you and your work? Amy, you go first.
The best way to find me is through Wheaton College, where I teach. So just go to Wheaton College, Amy Black at Wheaton College, there I am, and you can hear a little bit more about me and see more about what our cool students do.
And I lead a group called the Trinity Forum, where we try to cultivate, curate, and disseminate the best of Christian thought for the common good. And you can reach us at www.ttf.org.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for being with us today.
Great to be with you.
We can help.